Imagine a civilization so mysterious that historians even to this day can't fully explain who they were or how they built their empire. Picture a desert people who came from nothing, no cities, no rivers, no fertile land, and yet they became rulers of trade routes that connected to the east and to the west. They built monumental cities carved into mountains, hiding their secrets in plain sight, leaving only clues behind. This was the world of the Nabataeans, a culture so elusive, so enigmatic that even the greatest ancient historians could only marvel at their rise. Who were these people, and why have they vanished into the sands of time? Stick with me and we'll uncover the fascinating story of the Nabataeans, the desert nomads who became one of the most powerful commercial societies the world has ever known.
Historians of those days called Nabataeans the Arabs, and one of them was Diodorus Siculus. And here's what he wrote about the Nabataeans.
Here it is worthwhile to recount the institutions of these Arabs, by the practice of which they seem to protect their liberty. Their country has neither rivers nor copious springs from which it is possible for a hostile army to get water. They have a law neither to sow corn, nor to plant any fruit-bearing plant, nor to use wine, nor to build a house. This law they hold because they judge that those who possess these things will be easily compelled by powerful men to do what is ordered them because of their enjoyment of these things. Some of them keep camels, others sheep, pasturing them over the desert. Of the Arabian tribes, there are not a few who graze the desert, and these are much superior to the others in the amenities of life, being in number not much more than 10,000. For not a few of them are wont to bring down to the sea frankincense and myrrh, and the most costly of spices, receiving them from those who convey them from what is called Arabia Felix. They are conspicuously lovers of freedom, and flee into the desert, using this as a stronghold. They fill cisterns and caves with rainwater, making them flush with the rest of the land. They leave signals there, which are known to themselves, but not understood by anyone else. They water their herds every third day, so that they do not constantly need water in waterless regions if they have to flee.
At its peak, the influence of the Nabataeans stretched from what we know today as Yemen up to the Damascus, and from western Iraq into the Sinai Desert. Their empire was a vast expanse, yet historians can only speculate about the precise borders of their control. We know their caravans were legendary, traveling far and wide across the desert, but how far did their reach really go? The problem is that written records of the Nabataeans are almost non-existent. There are only a handful of surviving inscriptions, and even these are scattered, often just graffiti carved into canyon walls. This brings us to one of the greatest mysteries. Despite being one of the most literate societies of their time, almost every Nabataean could read and write. Why did they refuse to leave behind detailed records of their history? In contrast, the Egyptians, whose pharaohs documented their triumphs in grand temples, and the Babylonians, who wrote their deeds on clay tablets, the Nabataeans did not chronicle their empire in a similar way. Why didn't they write? What were they trying to hide? Were their secrets hidden in the desert that they didn't want the outside world to uncover? Let's dive into this mystery. To answer these questions, we need to talk about Petra, the Nabataean capital city, which remains one of the most awe-inspiring archaeological sites in the world. Petra is regarded to be one of the world's oldest cities. Archaeologists believe the city was founded around 321 BC. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss adventurer, found Petra in 1812. It is also known as the Lost City, since it was a forgotten metropolis for almost 5 centuries. The name Petra is derived from the Greek word Petros, which means rocks. Petra's architectural brilliance, historical relevance and breathtaking natural settings helped it become one of the new 7 wonders of the world. It's so spectacular that even today, tourists from around the globe stand in awe at its ancient beauty. But here's the thing, Petra wasn't just a city, it was a hidden city. Carved into the rocks of a desolate canyon, it was almost completely concealed from view. The entrance to the city is a narrow crack in the mountain more than a kilometer long and flanked by towering canyon walls over 100 meters high. Why would the people build such an awe-inspiring city in such a concealed location? Evidence reveals that the Nabataeans had a completely other name for the city, and the term Petra was not used until much later. According to carved inscriptions on the walls and the statements of ancient historian Josephus, the city was named Rakemo, after its royal creator. Here's the twist, Petra wasn't just a city, it was a tomb. Petra's mystery revolves around a massive temple or a tomb, the purpose of which remains unknown despite extensive exploration and analysis. The structure's mysterious nature raises doubts regarding its original role, importance and the civilization that built it. Despite a thorough examination, historians have yet to decide whether it was a religious sanctuary, a royal burial, or had many purposes. Local traditions add to the mystery of Petra, particularly about the giant postmarked urn in the center of the second floor of this intriguing building. According to these stories, the place exudes a sense of buried treasures, with some locals suspecting that ancient riches are hidden inside the depths of this urn. Archaeologists have only discovered 15% of Petra so far. The remainder is entirely buried and unexcavated. Petra has a large theater built on the mountainside at the base of another famous edifice, the High Place of Sacrifice. The theater was built during the reign of King Aretes IV and could seat approximately 4,000 people. Thousands of magnificent monuments and burial sites dot the landscape, and all of them were built in a remarkably short period, around the same time that the Roman Empire was rising. And then, almost as quickly as they had appeared, the Nabataeans vanished. They handed their empire over to the Romans, seemingly disappearing into the sands of time. So what really happened? What caused them to abandon their vast trade empire and all the wealth they had accumulated? Petra was their capital, but not the only town they had built. Haluza, Mamshit, Avdat, and Shivta are 4 Nabataean towns in southern Israel Negev desert, each with its own fortress and agricultural landscape. The communities relied on extraordinarily advanced water collection and irrigation system that enabled large-scale agriculture. Dams, channeling, cisterns and reservoirs were among the options. All of these features may be seen across Avdat and the central Negev, as well as remnants of old field systems strung along riverbeds and field slopes. To understand the Nabataeans, we first need to look at where they came from. Most historians place their arrival in the region around 586 BC, when the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem and took the Jewish people into exile. During this time, the land of Judah was left desolate, and the Edomites, enemies of the Jews, began migrating into the region. It's at this moment that the Nabataeans begin to appear in historical records, either as a nomadic tribe already living in the area or newcomers to the land. The writings of the early historians such as Strabo, Josephus, Pliny and Theodorus of Sicily have contributed significantly to our understanding of Nabataean culture. These historians provide tantalizing insights into Nabataean life and culture, as well as a general overview of their history as perceived by others. In the 1st century Anno Domini in Strabo's geography, it is written,
The Nabataeans are a sensible people and are so much inclined to acquire possessions that they publicly fine anyone who has diminished them, and also confer honors on anyone who has increased them. Since they have but few slaves, they are served by their kinsfolk for the most part, or by one another, or by themselves, so that the custom extends even to their ruler. They prepare common meals together in groups of 13 persons, and they have 2 girl singers for each banquet. Their leader holds many drinking bouts in magnificent style, but no one drinks more than 11 cupfuls, each time using a different golden cup. The ruler is so democratic that, in addition to serving himself, he sometimes even serves the others in his turn. He often renders an account of his leadership in the popular assembly, and sometimes his method of life is examined.
Except for the Petra scrolls, which are records of legal interactions during the Byzantine Empire, when the Nabataean kingdom was already in collapse, few Nabataean manuscripts survive today. But where exactly did they come from? Some believe they originated in Mesopotamia, from the region of modern-day Iraq. The famous historian Josephus even mentioned that the Nabataeans were descended from Ishmael's son, Nebaioth. Could it be that Nabataeans were connected to these ancient biblical figures? And if so, how did they make their way from Mesopotamia to the deserts of Arabia? Interestingly, some historians have suggested that the Nabataeans were like modern-day gypsies, wandering the desert and living on the fringes of established civilizations. They traded goods between cities without ever settling down or forming alliances with powerful empires. They were essentially invisible, living in the shadows of the great civilizations of their time, until they began to grow rich from their involvement in the frankincense and spice trade. It was this trade that turned them to a force to be reckoned with. While archaeologists continue to argue the origins of the Nabataeans, it is clear that they were well established in eastern Palestine by 300 BC. Bible scholars refer to this period as the 400 silent years, during which no prophets appeared in Israel. However, history does not remain silent. Greek soldiers stormed into the Middle East at this period. A short time later, Alexander the Great's generals divided his realm, and Antigonus the One-Eyed briefly ruling Syria and Ptolemy governing Egypt. The Nabataeans were not only traders, they were master traders. They knew the desert like the back of their hand, using secret water collection systems to survive in the harshest conditions. Amazingly, they were able to drive their caravans into the desert without interference from the indigenous tribes, who controlled wells and grazing areas. How did they accomplish this without leaving no evidence of their ties and agreements with these tribes? Perhaps they never had any alignments and agreements. I suppose the mysterious Nabataeans devised a way to move things in the desert without using local water wells, because the local tribes that held these water wells were occasionally hostile. The Nabataeans devised water collection devices to provide them with water in the desert. They created these systems and concealed them in locations unknown to others. Their trading networks stretched from the Arabian Peninsula to the shores of the Mediterranean, connecting the East and the West. They established a trading empire unparalleled on the planet. Through their merchant and trade system, they began importing things from the East and selling them in the West. Over the next few centuries, they would import spices, animals, iron, oil, copper, sugar, medicine, ivory, perfumes, pearls, cotton, ginger, cinnamon, silk, frankincense, myrrh, the gold for Egypt, Greece and Rome. They did, however, ship to India and China henna, storax, frankincense, asbestos, fabric, silk, gaze, silk damask, glass, opulent gold and silver. They were also responsible for the exchange of ideas and technologies between the major Eastern and Western civilizations, but their success came at a price. The mighty empires of Egypt, Greece and Rome started to notice the power of the Nabataeans were amassing, and they weren't happy. They complained the Nabataeans were monopolizing the spice trade and driving up prices, but every time an empire sent its armies to crush the Nabataeans, they managed to slip away, always evading capture. How did they do it? How did these small desert people outsmart the mightiest empires in the world? As the Nabataeans grew in power, they began to settle down and build monumental cities like Petra. But even in their urban years, they maintained a certain nomadic spirit. They avoided building houses and didn't engage in agriculture like civilizations around them. In fact, Diodorus Siculus, an ancient historian, noted that the Nabataeans had a law against planting crops, drinking wine, and even building houses. This ascetic lifestyle was their way of avoiding becoming dependent on anything that could make them vulnerable to powerful enemies. The Nabataeans' greatest feat was most likely their water management system. They created a system for collection rainwater that included water canals, pipes and subterranean cisterns. In addition, they created extremely durable, waterproof cement, some of which is still in use today. They also created sophisticated ceramic pipelines and reservoirs with gravity feeds, siphons or inverter siphons, to serve expanding urban centers. Outside of towns, dams closed off veddies to collect water during the rainy season, while stone circles or terraces slowed runoff from hillsides and trapped important topsoil, allowing irrigation lines to feed crops. The Nabataeans were skilled at collecting and storing water in underground cisterns. Throughout their caravan routes, covered water collection systems collected and stored water for later use. The Greek historian Diodorus observed,
"For in the waterless region, as it is called, they have dug wells at convenient intervals and have kept the knowledge of them from people of all other nations, and so they retreat in a body into this region out of danger. For since they themselves know about the places of hidden water and open them up, they have for their use drinking water in abundance. They take refuge in the desert, using this as a fortress, for it lacks water and cannot be crossed by others, but to them alone, since they have prepared subterranean reservoirs lined with stucco, it furnishes safety. As the earth in some places is clayey and in others is of soft stone, they make great excavations in it, the mouths of which they make very small, but by constantly increasing the width as they dig deeper, they finally make them of such size that each side has a length of about 100 feet. After filling these reservoirs with rainwater, they close the openings, making them even with the rest of the ground, and they leave signs that are known to themselves but are unrecognizable to others. They water their flocks every other day, so that if they flee or wander through waterless places, they may not need a continuous supply of water."
The Nabataeans mastered the ability of constructing a perfect cube system with corners that created perfect right angles. They occasionally added well-formed stone support pillars with precisely spaced, combed and oblique stone finishing. They applied cement made of high-quality water-resistant plaster on the prepared surface. The archaeologists believe that this must have taken hundreds of years to create and perfect. Today, these water-gathering systems may still be found throughout the desert, but more still have to be discovered. Many of these are still in use today, demonstrating the durability of the old Nabataean waterproof cement. These systems allowed Nabataean camel caravans to travel over the desert without having to use water wells controlled by local tribes. This provided the Nabataeans a major advantage in the frankincense trade, as they could travel throughout harsh desert places when others would perish from thirst. This provided them with a form of safety because their caravans could traverse unobserved through the desert. It also gave Nabataeans with places to seek shelter during time of conflict or oppression. But this lifestyle didn't last forever. As the empire grew, they began to abandon some of these practices, settling into more urbanized ways of life. Still, they remained a mystery to the outside world. Their language, their culture, and even their very origins remain debated to this day. The final question remains, why did the Nabataeans fade into history? By the time the Romans conquered their territory, the Nabataeans seemed to vanish almost overnight. Was it the overwhelming force of Rome, or was it that the Nabataeans had achieved their goals and no longer needed the empire they had built? Perhaps they simply didn't need the world to know their story. choosing to fade into the desert from which they came, leaving only the ruins behind. Whatever the reason, Nabataeans remain one of history's greatest mysteries, an empire of trade, culture and secrecy that for a time controlled the flow of some of the world's most valuable goods. And though their empire was long since fallen, the legend of the Nabataeans lives on. So what do you think? Who were the Nabataeans really? And what made them so successful and so secretive? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating stories from history. Until next time, keep exploring the mysteries of the past.